All right, looks like we're getting set up here. Okay, thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you today. My topic is a research update on the Mediterranean diet. So I am a registered dietitian, and I work as the Vice President of Nutrition Programming at Oldways, a nonprofit nutrition education organization focused on the healthy and sustainable joys of the old ways of eating. These are my disclosures, and these are our learning objectives for today. So to start off, I'm going to give a little bit of background on the Mediterranean diet. Then I'm going to share a research update on 3 different health issues. We're going to talk a little bit about the flexibility of the Mediterranean diet and look for areas of overlap with other cultural food traditions around the world. And then we're going to close with some practical tips so that we can help our patients really reap the benefits of this eating pattern. Oh, and I guess a fun fact, I might be the only person in this country who has held out and not yet had a Facebook. That's the best I can come up with for now. Alrighty, so I'm so pleased to be talking about the Mediterranean diet in particular, because this has been a key area of focus for our organization since the very beginning, more than 30 years ago. If you rewind back in time, 1992 is when the USDA first introduced their food pyramid. And at the time, a lot of nutrition experts felt like maybe that first food pyramid didn't quite capture the best of nutrition science. That first food pyramid was also accompanied by this trend towards low-fat and fat-free snack foods that weren't necessarily the most nutrient-dense options on the market. Now, at this point in history, Oldways had been working with the Harvard School of Public Health on a series of conferences about the Mediterranean diet. And so the following year, in 1993, we brought together a bunch of experts, including Walter Willett from the Harvard School of Public Health, Antonia Trikopoulou from the University of Athens, as well as Ansel Keys himself. And the goal of this group was really to reach consensus on defining what are the key elements of a Mediterranean diet, and then taking that information and translating it into a visual graphic, which was the first Mediterranean diet pyramid. And the goal of that graphic, similar to the USDA food pyramid, was to have something visual, a communication tool for consumers to help them have a better understanding of diet and health. The following year, in 1994, the World Health Organization signed on to that first Mediterranean diet pyramid. So when we talk about the Mediterranean diet, what are we talking about? Basically, this is a pattern of eating inspired by the foods and foodways of the countries that surround the Mediterranean Sea. So while a meal in Greece might look a little different than a meal in Italy, which might look a little different than a meal in North Africa or Turkey, really what we're looking at here is those shared ingredients and the shared proportion of food groups to see this overall pattern. So as you can see in the visual, the foundation of most meals are these plant-based foods like legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds. Olive oil, monounsaturated fat, is the primary cooking oil. And then meals are flavored with herbs, spices, seafood, small amounts of fermented dairy products like cheeses and yogurts. And we'll also sometimes see some poultry and eggs and things like that. Zooming out even further beyond the dietary factors, this is a lifestyle where the pleasures of the table are emphasized, community, sharing meals amongst friends and loved ones, home cooking, and also joyful daily movement. And I think similar to the African heritage diet that Adante presented on, one reason that the Mediterranean diet has really stood the test of time is that it is also very flavor forward. So for a lot of our patients who have yet to had their awakening that good food and good health can really go hand in hand, I think this is a great option to consider for them as a possible point of entry to really get them excited about food and excited about eating some of these healthier recipes. So there is a lot of great randomized controlled trials on the Mediterranean diet, but I did want to briefly touch on some of the methodology for the observational studies, since that's also a really valuable tool for us to see patterns when it comes to health and nutrition. So this is an example of a Mediterranean diet score. This one is from Sophie et al., which was adapted from a version that Antonia Trikopoulou used in the 90s. And essentially, a participant's diet will be scored based on how closely their diet aligns with the Mediterranean diet in each of these categories, and then the higher adherence they have, the higher the score will be. And there's a bunch of different Mediterranean diet scores out there. Some of them separate out fruit and nuts more. Some of them have slightly different thresholds for what they would consider high consumption, medium, or low. And some might look at meat or dairy a little differently. But I would say this is fairly representative of the type of scoring tool that you'll see frequently in the literature. So the first of the 3 health issues that I wanted to touch on today is heart disease. Low rates of heart disease in the Mediterranean region in the mid-20th century were one of the first signals that got researchers really interested in the Mediterranean diet in the first place. In the decades since then, there has been exponentially more research published on heart disease in the Mediterranean diet. Just last year, a systematic review and meta-analysis of 40 studies encompassing more than 35,000 people found that people who most closely followed a Mediterranean diet had a 28% lower risk of all-cause mortality, a 45% lower risk of cardiovascular disease mortality, a 35% lower risk of stroke, and a 52% lower risk of non-fatal heart attacks. Randomized controlled trials are often considered the gold standard of nutrition research. In one such study published in Lancet, 1,000 Spanish adults were assigned to either a Mediterranean-style diet or a low-fat diet. Those in the Mediterranean group had a 25 to 29% lower risk of a major cardiovascular event like a heart attack or stroke, and that these results were particularly strong in men. That being said, women can also stand to benefit from a Mediterranean-style diet. In a systematic review and meta-analysis of 16 studies encompassing more than 700,000 women, women most closely following a Mediterranean diet had a 24% lower risk of cardiovascular disease, a 23% lower risk of mortality, and a 25% lower risk of coronary heart disease. So what's going on in the body here? Why might we be seeing some of these reduced risks for a lot of these heart conditions? In one randomized controlled trial, about 900 people with heart disease were randomly assigned to either a Mediterranean diet or a control diet. And those in the Mediterranean group were actually able to improve their markers of atherosclerosis over a period of 5 years. The next health issue I wanted to touch on is around healthy aging. Some of you may have heard the term blue zones, like places around the world where people live longer, and some of those blue zones, not surprisingly, have been found in the Mediterranean region. So in a study of over 60,000 adults in the UK, people most closely following a Mediterranean diet had a 23% lower risk of dementia than those not following a Mediterranean diet, and that was independent of their genetic susceptibility to dementia. Healthy lifespan is defined as how long we live in full health without disease or injury. And I think that's a great metric and target for us to keep an eye on for our patients, since we want their lives to be full and comfortable. So in this study, researchers looked at the eating habits and health outcomes of people from 130 countries around the world. And they found that when people's diets closely aligned with the overall pattern of a Mediterranean diet, that they had increased life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. So it's not just about living longer, but it's that combination of living longer and also helping delaying the onset of some of these chronic diseases. In a study of 2,000 adults from the Framingham Offspring Study, those most closely following a Mediterranean diet had a 38% lower risk of frailty. I think, it's still too soon to say exactly what's at play here, and it's probably not possible to narrow it down to one mechanism in particular, but there have been some researchers curious if the gut microbiome might play a role. So in this study of meta-analysis of 64 studies, they found that those most closely following a Mediterranean diet had a lower risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And they also found specific species of bacteria in the gut microbiome that were inversely related between the Mediterranean diet and neurodegenerative diseases, indicating that there might be a relationship there. And then the final health area that I wanted to touch on is still more of an emerging area of research, but that's around like fertility and healthy babies. So in a prospective study of nearly 8,000 women, those most closely following a Mediterranean diet had a 31% lower risk of any adverse pregnancy outcome. And that was a dose-response relationship, meaning the closer mom's diet was to a Mediterranean diet, the lower risk she had of any adverse pregnancy outcome. When looking at specific outcomes, those most closely following a Mediterranean diet had a 28% lower risk of preeclampsia and a 37% lower risk of gestational diabetes. Researchers are also curious to see how mom's diet might impact baby's development down the road. So in one randomized control trial, they took 600 pregnant mothers and randomly assigned some of them to a Mediterranean diet group, some of them to a mindfulness-based stress reduction group, and then the final third received their standard prenatal care. Those in the Mediterranean group and the mindfulness group, when their children were 2 years old, they had higher scores in the social and emotional domain compared with the standard prenatal care. And then for those mothers who were following a Mediterranean diet, they also had higher scores in the cognitive domain at 2 years when compared with the typical prenatal care. A lot of the foods and food groups in the Mediterranean diet are the types of foods and food groups that are often recommended for fertility and pregnancy success. So researchers have also been curious if the Mediterranean diet in particular had any type of link with fertility. In a meta-analysis and systematic review of 11 studies, researchers found that a Mediterranean diet seemed to be linked with live births, pregnancy rate, sperm concentration, and sperm count, but that the results weren't consistent across studies. They indicated that there may be some possibility of sperm improvement and some possibility of better pregnancy outcomes, but that we don't have enough clinical data to make specific recommendations. So hopefully that's an area that we'll see more research on in the future. So what's next in terms of Mediterranean diet research? Definitely hope to see more in the world of fertility and pregnancy success. Also on the gut microbiome and dementia prevention. As our population in the US ages, I think people are very interested in everything we can be doing to help people age healthfully and prevent some of these age-related diseases like dementia. And then another really hot topic right now is around alcohol. Our patients see things about, alcohol or red wine being a part of the Mediterranean diet. They might come to you and say, oh, there's red wine in the Mediterranean diet. Is red wine healthy? And that can be a really tough question for people to answer because on the one hand, we know that alcohol is linked with a higher risk of cancer. But on the other hand, we also know that these groups who've traditionally consumed wine as part of a Mediterranean diet do tend to have better health outcomes. Dr. Martinez Gonzalez, he was one of the principal investigators on the PREDIMED Plus trial of the Mediterranean diet. And he had previously suggested that if we were to remove wine from the Mediterranean diet, that we might see a 23% reduction in the protective effect. But the studies we had at the time weren't really well designed to capture that. So that's actually what he's working on right now. So you can look up the protocols for his new study, which is recruiting this year, where he's going to take a much closer look at wine in the Mediterranean diet specifically, so that we can be better equipped to make these types of recommendations and to answer our clients' questions from a more informed place. So I'm really excited to see that research move forward. And then the last area that I wanted to mention is that we do hope to see more research in terms of dietary diversity and looking at different cultural food traditions around the world. And that's kind of what I'm going to touch on now. All right, so as many of you are well aware, there is not one single best diet in the world. There are multiple different pathways to healthy eating. And as Adante alluded to earlier, one of the ways we really try to champion this at Oldways is by working with subject matter experts to create these different heritage diet pyramids so that we can continue to be uplifting a variety of food traditions from around the world. I'll share that one of the biggest challenges we've had in our 30+ years of working in this cultural nutrition space is that the state of nutrition research right now continues to be very Eurocentric. So any quick PubMed search will show you that there is a multitude of studies on the Mediterranean diet. but we just haven't done as great of a job in the research community at documenting some of these other global food traditions. As healthcare providers, we are tasked with making sure everything we're doing with our patients is evidence-based, but it's also easy to see how this emphasis on evidence-based can in some cases be marginalizing solutions that are rooted in some of these lesser known and lesser studied food traditions. So around the world, there is a ton of culinary diversity. But if we look pretty closely, you can kind of start to see some common threads. Heritage diets allow us to connect not only with our own heritage, but also with each other. And I really like this graphic. We have an animation, but I don't know if it's going to play. But it really evokes this sense of connection between the various heritage diets. So hopefully these slides will be made available to you after and you can see it for yourself. All right, so if you're looking for like this one diet that is inclusive of everyone and representative of the way that everyone around the world eats, you're probably not going to find it. The reality is that these different heritage diets developed organically because different crops thrive in different regions and because people have different religious preferences, dietary preferences, and cultural needs. For example, individuals of East Asian or African descent tend to be more likely to be lactose intolerant than individuals of Northern European descent. So naturally, dairy wasn't as big of a part of the diet in those regions. Additionally, some religions will discourage consumption of pork or beef or other ingredients, which shapes the protein preferences of those communities. So the different foods and flavors allow a sense of really cultural expression, and they give regional identity to the dishes. So even though the pattern might be shared based on what ingredients you're using or how you're preparing them, you can really capture that sense of regional identity. And I think a really interesting example to look at is the dish salsa. When we think of salsa, you know, it's typically made from tomatoes, onion, peppers, and spices. And these are all ingredients that a lot of us may associate with the Mediterranean diet and dishes like a Spanish sofrito. But when we think of salsa, that's an important part of Latin American heritage cuisine. So you can see how there are similarities in some foods, but the way they're prepared can give them regional identity. And if this is a topic that you're interested in, we actually just published a paper a few weeks ago, last month, looking at the African heritage, Asian heritage, and Latin American heritage diets as cultural models of healthy eating, and really trying to document the literature that exists so that hopefully any academics in this room can build on this work and help us continue to strengthen the evidence base. So this is a great resource if that's something you want to dive into further. All right, Adante acknowledged this really beautifully with his Venn diagram about, you know, the standard American diet on one side and traditional African heritage diet on the other, and about how public health change doesn't happen overnight. And it takes a lot of little steps for someone to gradually move forward on their journey to better health. So in the case of the Mediterranean diet, which is what I'm talking about today, I'm just going to share a few little swaps or ideas for Mediterraneanizing meals that you can take forward with your patients. So if you got a patient who loves spaghetti and meatballs, one option that could be fun to try with them might be a pasta puttanesca. So here the flavor comes from olives and walnuts, and it's much more plant forward and vegetable forward. And we did it here with a whole wheat spaghetti. And whole wheat pastas are often priced on par with their refined counterparts, and tend to be one of the more affordable whole grain options. So if grocery prices are a concern to your patients, that's always an affordable option to look at. For our patients and clients who like red meat, we're not taking it away, but we're going to help them see how they might redistribute the proportions on their plate so that it looks a little different. So instead of that typical like 3-pile meal where you have a steak and potatoes and peas and carrots, we took beef, but we put it in smaller pieces, skewered with veggies, and then we did that over a bulgur pilaf. And I really like to recommend bulgur to patients. If you're not familiar with it, it's a whole wheat kernel that's been cracked into smaller pieces and kind of steamed. So it cooks so fast in like 5 minutes. And so that's a great weeknight option for your patients and clients who want to get a meal on the table but might not have a ton of time to get it ready. For breakfast, we're going to move away from the white toast towards more of a whole grain toast. And there's, in the bread aisle, there are a ton of partially whole grain products or white whole wheat products for people who aren't quite ready to make that switch. We're going to spread it with avocado instead of butter. Avocado is filled with monounsaturated fats, which are the type of fatty acids in olive oil. So you're getting that similar macronutrient balance as you would find in the Mediterranean diet. For the eggs, we're not going to do plain eggs. We're going to do a vegetable and cheese frittata. And that can be nice because it can be prepared ahead of time, and then it's a kind of dish that reheats even in the toaster oven really nicely. And then, of course, you can't forget fruit. For lunch, we're going to move away from some of the deli meats and try something with hummus. We're going to stuff in baby spinach, cucumber slices, hummus, nuts, into a whole grain pita pocket, and then instead of chips, to have something very easy grab and go snack size, we have carrot sticks and apples, but really any fruit or vegetable would do. And instead of our processed meats and refined grain platter, we have a couple of ideas for different like hors d'oeuvre type of dishes. So the dip in that photo is a romesco sauce. That's a Spanish-inspired sauce with roasted red peppers and walnuts. So you get that vitamin C from the red pepper. You get your veggies in. You get some heart-healthy fats in. And then we're going to dip that with whole grain crackers. The center image is dates filled with goat cheese and nuts, so that's sort of like sweet, tangy combo. And then we've pictured it with roasted vegetables because we have found in some cases that can be more inviting to people than like raw broccoli. And if you're looking at these photos and you're like, yeah, there's no way my patient will eat any of those foods that you've pictured, I think this is a good opportunity for teaching kitchens, right? I think it's really hard for someone to make that mental leap of like being, as Adante pictured, all the way one way in the Venn diagram to go all the way the other. But if they have the opportunity to try something in a low-risk environment where they're not having to spend their own grocery monies on it, they're not having to worry if their kids will eat it, I think that's a good introduction. And if you have a teaching kitchen setting where you're able to demonstrate the recipe in front of them or even allow them to get their hands dirty and participate with you, then that can also help potentially move them further to the next stage of change or stage of readiness, because they can see like, oh, that wasn't that hard, or oh, bulgur really does cook faster than white rice. So I think, again, we don't need to move them all the way from one photo all the way to the next, but these are just ideas of touch points where we could potentially intervene, and just to even find one recipe that our patients are excited about can be that tipping point to get them to be a little more experiential with what they're putting on the table. A lot of the physicians we work with recognize that nutrition is so important for preventing and managing disease, but not all of the physicians we work with feel like they have the time or training necessary to support their patients along this particular aspect of health. As Adante mentioned, there are plenty of resources that exist on nutrition specifically and on cultural diets in particular. There is no need to reinvent the wheel with every patient, and I think that's the great thing about being here at this event this weekend, is that we're going to have the opportunity to learn from different individuals who are really doing cool programs in their hometowns, utilizing new resources, and creating different interventions so that we can learn from each other and scale the solutions that work so that we're able to reach more people. And then again, I want to reiterate that, no person is in this alone. I would encourage you, if you feel like your nutrition training was inadequate, to partner with a dietitian on your team and develop some culinary medicine programming together based on these findings. Because when we work as part of an interdisciplinary team, that will keep the providers from feeling out of scope, and it will result in better outcomes for our patients. This is my contact information. I welcome any of you to write with me.